Hi, my name is Eliel Cruz. I'm an activist in New York City. My coming out story is complex. I knew I was different at an early age. I liked things different than the other boys my age liked. I was in gymnastics, I played the flute, I was more feminine. I liked to shop, I still like to shop. I didn't really understand my sexuality until I Googled the words, I like boys and girls, and the word bisexual came up, and that made sense for me. I naively thought that other people would understand that as well as I did. So when people would be like, you're a faggot, you're gay, I would defiantly be like, no, I'm bisexual. The problem with that is that I grew up in a very conservative Christian denomination, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's the same denomination as Ben Carson. And I only went to private Seventh-day Adventist schools my entire life. So I was naming my truth at about 13, 14 years old in a space that was not anywhere near affirming and was actively violent. When I began to tell my truth and story to those around me, it was shared to other folks in the administration, and I was asked to leave my academy. That process was hard for me because as I had only ever experienced that religious space, that was my home. In a lot of ways, that's still my home, even though I don't feel as accepted as I once did. That space was nurturing for me, it was family, it was more than church once a week, it was my day-to-day, my Bible classes every single day, chapels in the middle of the week. It was a community, it was a culture. But as soon as I named my truth, I was no longer part of that community. And that was difficult for me, which is part of the reason I voluntarily went to conversion therapy. I asked my parents that I needed to work out a lot of different things, and one of those things being my sexuality. But I didn't ever think that my sexuality, like something was wrong with my sexuality until I was told something was wrong with it. When I named my truth in that way, I thought the heavens opened up and it was finally made sense to me. And it wasn't until the Christian folk around me told me that was not okay that I knew something was wrong with me. My entrance into conversion therapy was in order for me to be reaccepted into that community. But that only made me hate myself and only made me hate God in a way that I had never had before. I was very depressed, I was suicidal, and it wasn't until I began the journey to reaccepting myself, despite what was being told around me, that I felt comfortable again in my own skin. So I wrestled with God about my sexuality in my late teen years because everything that had happened to me around my sexuality were by people who called themselves Christians, people who I had known for long periods of time. I remember after I came out, I went to a local Walmart supermarket with my mom, and I saw a pastor that I really, really loved, who we had great friendship before. And I saw that pastor and I said, "Hey pastor, how are you doing?" And I had my hand out to shake his hand, and he looked at my hand and he walked away from me. And that was such a pivotal moment for me. I remember turning to my mother and crying because I'd never felt that physical rejection in such a way. Like I felt dirty and so unclean. So that process in conversion therapy did not work out, and it only made things worse. And it wasn't until that I was really calling out to God and crying and upset with how I was being treated and how I felt because I knew that I wasn't able to change who I was, and that in fact I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing to quote unquote change who I was, and it wasn't taking, that I felt this like calming sense of God saying that there's nothing wrong with you. So I was able to reconcile my faith and sexuality without even being able to justify it in scripture in my late teen years, just by knowing that I didn't feel that God was telling me anything was wrong with you. I felt that Christians were saying these things, well, I knew that Christians were saying these things, but that God loved me just the way I am and the fact that he created me that way. So I accepted myself, and then I kind of came out in college when my parents were asking me if I was still queer, and I said yes, it hasn't changed. And all of that kind of trauma, all of that hurt that happened in religious spaces really fueled who I am today. My advocacy came out of necessity, right? So I find myself in situations at my Christian college, because I went back to a Christian college willingly, because I missed those spaces, that I needed to advocate for myself, and because it had to do with my sexual orientation. And I did, luckily, and then I found myself wanting and feeling called to advocate for others who didn't have the same support system that I did. And so then I worked with others on my campus who were, for the first time, sharing their truths around their sexuality and gender, to find safety, to find pockets of safety, to be able to do that. I do this work today so that people don't have to face any of the trauma that I did. So one of the ways I do that work now is through a digital media campaign called Faithfully LGBT. I capture the stories of LGBT people of all different faith traditions who, by their existence, show that we can, in one body, have sexuality and gender that is not cis or straight, completely entwined with our faith traditions. And coming out has been a continuous process, not as much anymore since all I do is very queer. But it's one of the best decisions I've ever made, and one of the best decisions I continue to make. So if you're in a space where you haven't been able to tell your truth quite yet, and you're wanting to, or you're going to be ready to soon, find resources. If it's LGBT faith stuff, you can go to faithfullylgbt.com, where we have a lot of different resources for different faith traditions, for people who are going through similar things like you. Find a chosen family, find people who will see you for who you are, affirm you in the ways that you identify, and lift you up and support you. And don't give up.